Hello everyone, in this video today we're going through some examples for capitalization of interest, okay, and this is specifically for specific and general debt interest rates, okay. That's the type of example we're going through in this problem, okay. The reason that we have a separate example for this and then we have a comprehensive example of actual capitalization of interest, all the calculations, is because this is a little bit of a challenging topic, and so we can just sort of isolate it by itself and go more in depth with it in a separate problem just to get a feel for how to do it. Okay, so XYZ company is in the construction business. The company began construction of a building on January 1 of 2017. The building will be completed during 2018. The company has the following information available related to the construction of this building. Okay, then we're given all our items and then we're given all the amounts. Okay, additionally, all debt in the table above was outstanding during all of 2017. Okay, so that's telling us all this debt was outstanding for the entire year. Okay, so that means that when we're actually solving for our actual interest, you know, we can multiply by 12 over 12 for the fraction of the year, right? But we don't even really need to do that because that's just equal to 1, right? So we don't even need to worry about that, okay? So we don't have to worry about fractions of years. That's basically what that's telling us, okay? So required to determine the avoidable interest and the actual interest for XYZ company for the year ended December 31 of 2017. Additionally, determine how much interest was capitalized and then how much was expensed in the income statement. So again, we had this first lesson, which was basically self-constructed assets and the capitalization of interest. This is basically our basics for the capitalization of interest, okay? And on this packet, we had a lot of potentially confusing items because we hadn't seen numbers yet to go with these. And so the main place we're going to be focusing right now is right here, interest rates for interest capitalization, okay? So again, if you haven't seen this video, you kind of do need to go back and watch this because we're going to be relying on this packet, and without it, it's not going to make a ton of sense. Okay, so let's just make sure that we have what we need. We don't need to be able to see this entire page, we just need to be able to see that. Okay, so we basically can see all the facts. Okay, perfect. Okay, so basically, to solve this problem, okay, the first thing that we want to do is that we want to solve for our blended or weighted average interest rate, okay? Because the reason that I guess the first step is to figure out, okay, what's the weighted average accumulated expenditure? Okay, the weighted average accumulated expenditure is 2.5 million. And again, the weighted average accumulated expenditure is basically the expenditures made to construct an asset multiplied by the number of months out of 12 that the expenditure can incur interest, okay? And so basically what this weighted average accumulated expenditure does is that it helps us to calculate our avoidable interest, okay? That's basically what we're using it for, okay? And so that's what we are worried about in this problem. We will see how to calculate it in the next problem for capitalization of interest, like the comprehensive example of capitalization of interest, okay? But just for now, just basically what you need to know about weighted average accumulated expenditure is that we're going to use it to calculate our avoidable interest. Okay, it's going to help us calculate avoidable interest. And then the other thing that we need to be aware of is these notes right here. Okay, these are going to make a lot more sense once we actually start going through this problem. Okay, so basically for weighted average accumulated expenditure, it's 2.5 million. Okay, then the next thing that we want to do after we figure out our weighted average accumulated expenditure, whether it's given to us or we have to solve for it, we might have to solve for it. Okay. In this problem, it's given, just to simplify. In the next problem we do, it's going to be, we have to solve for it. Okay, but here it's given, so it's easier. So it's 2.5 million. Okay, then we have something called specific debt. Okay, it's $500,000. Okay, specific debt is debt that is taken out for a project to specifically finance that project. Okay, so XYZ company is basically constructing this building, right? And so to construct this specific building, they took out a loan of $500,000, 5% notes that are due in 2018, okay? So they took out a loan specifically for this problem, for this, not for this problem. Well, I guess you can kind of think of it that way, but basically for the construction of this building, okay? Then on top of that, they have two pieces of general debt, okay? When we see general debt, that means that that's other debt that's outstanding that is not specifically taken out to finance this project, okay? So we have two types of debt. That's why these become a little bit complicated, okay? We first have specific debt, and then we have general debt, okay? Specific debt, again, taken out to finance a specific project. General debt is just general debt that's financing our overall operations, right? It's not specifically for this project. It's just debt the company has outstanding in general, okay, for anything the company's doing, okay? So what we want to do is that we first want to note the weighted average cumulative expenditure. Then we want to look down specific debt, and we want to determine how much is the specific debt. Okay, so specific debt is $500,000 in this case. Okay, if we go over to our little notes over here, we see specific borrowing interest rate. Okay, the specific borrowing interest rate, okay, which in this case is 5% because that's the debt that is specifically incurred for this project. That's what specific borrowing interest rate means. Okay, it's the rate for the specific debt for the project. Okay, that is applied to the weighted average cumulative expenditure that is less than or equal to the amount of debt specifically borrowed for the project. Okay, so it's applied to the weighted average cumulative expenditure that is less than or equal to the amount of debt specifically borrowed for the project. Okay, so for our purposes, all right, we have $2.5 million of weighted average cumulative expenditure, right? And then we have the specific debt of $500,000. All right, so what happens is that, what ends up happening then is that we can basically use the 5% rate for the first $500,000 of weighted average accumulated expenditure. Okay, that's basically what this is saying here. Okay, so again, it's applied to the weighted average accumulated expenditure for the first $500,000 because of the fact that this weighted average cumulative expenditure actually exceeds the specific borrowing debt. Okay, so once this weighted average cumulative expenditure exceeds $500,000, we have to use the general rate. Okay, so this is actually going to be broken up into two parts. We're going to have $2 million at the general rate, okay, which we have to solve for, and then we have 500K times the specific rate. Okay, so what happens, basically what this is saying here, this specific note, okay, this weighted average cumulative expenditure, anything up into and including 500,000 is capitalized at 5%, okay? So we're basically going to take the weighted average cumulative expenditure for $1 all the way up to $500,000. Anything within that range, we multiply by 5%, okay? Once we get over 500,000, once we get over the specific amount for this, once we get over the amount for the specific debt, okay, the actual principal of the specific debt, then we start capitalizing the rest of it at the general debt rate, okay? And we have to solve for the general rate, okay? So it says right here, general borrowing interest rate applied to weighted average cumulative expenditure that is more than the amount of the debt specifically borrowed for the project. Okay, so again, it's the weighted average cumulative expenditure that is greater than the debt specifically borrowed, right? So the weighted average cumulative expenditure that's greater than the debt borrowed is $2 million, right? Because we have $2.5 million of weighted average cumulative expenditure, and we have $500,000 for the specific debt. Okay. So again, specific borrowing rate applied to weighted average cumulative expenditure that is less than or equal to the amount of debt specifically borrowed for the project. Okay, so again, we do this up until 500,000 in this case, and then anything above 500,000, we do general borrowing interest rate. Okay, so then what we do for general borrowing interest rate is that we have to basically do a weighted average rate of all the other debts that are outstanding during the project. Okay, and the actual formula for this, okay, this is what we need to do. Basically, the first step is to identify, okay, weighted average cumulative expenditure, how much is specific debt, and then how much would be capitalized at the general debt rate. And the reason you would do that first is because, let's say the weighted average cumulative expenditure was only like $490, okay? In that case, if this was actually only $490, the interest associated with that for avoidable interest would only be $490 times 0.05. It would actually only be $24,500 because we're going to capitalize everything up into $500,000 at 5%. And then we don't even need to worry about the general debt because this weighted average cumulative expenditure, if it was $490, it doesn't even exceed $500,000. So the general debt doesn't even matter in this case, okay? We don't even have to worry about that in this case, okay? But because of the fact that we go over 500,000, that's why we want to identify, okay, what is the weighted average cumulative expenditure versus the specific debt? Because then that tells us, do we need to even solve for this? Right? Because if we were in this example, like I just said, we would use 5% for all of it, so we wouldn't even need to calculate the weighted average interest rate. Okay, but in this problem, we do need to calculate the weighted average interest rate because we do need to capitalize. We do need to use $2 million of the weighted average cumulative expenditure to calculate our avoidable interest. Okay. So the weighted average interest rate, what you do is you take the total interest, you divide it by the total principal. Okay. So basically we would take so this is, and again, this is for only general rate debt, right? We're not doing specific debt here. We're only doing the general debt here, okay? Because otherwise we would basically like double count the specific debt. That'd be really weird, okay? So total interest, how are we going to solve for interest? Well, we have to take the principal and multiply it by the interest rate for the first one, take the principal, multiply by the interest rate for the second one, and then we divide by the total principal. The total principal is just 2 million plus 1 million, gives us 3 million. And we have our weighted average interest rate of 8.67%. This weighted average interest rate is for these two debts combined, right? It's basically saying, you know, what is the weighted average rate between those two debts, okay? So it's just basically, you take the interest, so it's principal times the interest rate to get the interest amount for both of them, 2 million times 0.08, 1 million times 10%, divided by the total principal, we get our weighted average interest rate. Then we've done most of the work. Now we just have to actually solve for the numbers that we need, which are avoidable interest and actual interest. And then we've done most of the problem, okay? There's a lot of work up front in these problems, and then the last parts are just kind of like doing a couple calculations. But once you've kind of mastered this first part of identifying when do we calculate, or when do we use the specific debt, when do we use the general debt, the rest of it is pretty straightforward. Okay, so again, like I said at the beginning, we're using this weighted average cumulative expenditure to determine our avoidable interest. Okay, that's what we're using it for. Okay, because again, avoidable interest, if we're looking at the very top of this page, it's the amount of interest a company could theoretically avoid if the company had not made payments for the asset it is constructing. Okay, and so again, we're calculating avoidable interest and then actual interest, and avoidable interest will be reviewed a little bit further in concrete form with numbers in the next problem. But again, we want to calculate both of these because then it helps us determine, we must capitalize the lower of the avoidable and the actual interest. So it helps us to determine which one is capitalized and then how much is expensed, okay? So again, avoidable interest, like we talked about up here, we'll take our weighted average cumulative expenditure, the first 500,000, we multiply by 0.05%, that gives us $25,000. Then we take the next 2 million, which again, the next 2 million is 2.5 million times 500,000. That gives us, times our weighted average rate, that gives us $173,400. So we add those up, we get avoidable interest of $198,400. Okay, then we have to calculate our actual interest. Our actual interest, again, all these debts are outstanding for the entire year, so we don't have to worry about fractions of the year. So we just take the principal for each one, we multiply by the interest rate. The principal times the interest rate. The principal times the interest rate, okay? And then once we do all that, we get actual interest of $285. I am going through this a little bit quickly just because we've kind of already gone through it a little bit, and this is just literally calculating interest, okay? It's just principal times interest rate. It's very straightforward, okay? So actual interest rate is $285. Avoidable interest is $198, okay? Then it says we have to calculate the lower, right? We capitalize the lower of avoidable and actual. So now we look, okay, we want to capitalize the lower, so it must be avoidable, right? Because it's 198 for avoidable versus 285 for actual. And then the amount expensed in the income statement is basically just the difference between the total interest of 285, which is what we actually incurred, minus the amount that we capitalized. So it's 86.6, okay? And we have a note over here that says that too. The amount of interest capitalized is shown in the balance sheet. That would be the 198.4. And then the difference between the amount capitalized, which is 198.4, and then the total interest, which is 285, is expense in the income statement, right? So we're saying the expense in the income statement, the difference between the amount capitalized, again 198, and the total interest, again 285, is on the income statement, that's 86.6. Okay, and so that's basically what the problem wants us to do, solve for actual and avoidable interest, and then also determine what is capitalized and what is expensed. Okay. So again, this was mainly to focus in on the interest rates involved, okay? What all these terms specifically mean. We're going to go through weighted average accumulated expenditure more specifically and in the next problem a little bit more in depth, and we're going to go through avoidable interest, okay, a little bit more in that next problem, okay? But just to be able to solve this problem, okay, the way that I talked about before with weighted average cumulative expenditure helping us to solve avoidable interest, that's a good enough framework for us to solve this problem. But once we see the next video, we'll be able to see a full view of basically what is going on in these problems. Okay, so that's the end of this video, and I hope that was helpful.